Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Hail Yes, a Detroit Free Press podcast about University of Michigan athletics. I'm Tony Garcia, Michigan football and basketball writer for The Free, here to wish you all a happy football season. That's right, Florida State at Georgia Tech. My girlfriend's Noles take on the Yellow Jackets this Saturday, noon, at whatever Georgia Tech stadium name is.
Wrong.
It's
overseas.
Ireland.
It's in Ireland.
It's in Ireland. Yeah.
It's in Ireland. So, see,
yes.
Now, yeah. All right. I saw there was an at. I forgot. Yes. Oh, this one's in Dublin. This was Northwestern played in this game last year. All right. The wheels are spinning. Football's back, baby. Sorry, a little rusty there. Bear with us. It'll get better the rest of the way. Those voices you heard, I will introduce first. Reiner Saban, our Big Ten insider. The college football season is now just days away. How will you be celebrating the kickoff, Reiner?
I don't know if I'll be watching much this 0 week. I don't care about these random games. And I also don't understand why college football season starts in Ireland. Why? I mean, Ireland has no connection to college football that I can foresee other than the fact that maybe they had rugby, which was a precursor to football. I mean, I don't get why this is an annual kickoff. Like, it should be in America. That's where college football is most popular. I don't get it. You know,
They should be buying
just
Ford trucks. They should be,
It's like having the Premier League start in New York and England.
I think that'd be kind of sick. I mean, I don't care at all about soccer, but that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, the Community Shield. It'd be like having the Community Shield game in like Los Angeles or New York. I mean, like, what are we doing here? This does not make any sense.
It has to be some corporate like potato sponsorship or something that drove them over there. In week 0 is like, I don't even know how it got invented in the first place and how it.
Well, we used to have back in the day. They used to have games in like East Rutherford. We had Giant Stadium. They used to have a kickoff classic sometime. You know, and this was back in the 80s and 90s. But
it just keeps getting weirder and weirder. I mean, like,
game back at night. It was Lloyd Carr's first game in '95. They scored a last second touchdown. I think it was drives back to Mercury Hayes, for the touchdown, and walked off against Virginia in that game. But that was like, those were unusual. Like, this has become an annual thing, and I don't get it. Yeah.
Yes. The days of Mercury Hayes that we all fondly remember. Of course, the other voice that you heard there is our editor and producer, Andrew Burkle. Andrew, what is your excitement level for the football season?
I always get way overexcited for these games. Like, especially those first Thursday games. This year we got Minnesota, North Carolina. There's a couple other games, not as good as that one. But Florida State, Georgia Tech is actually pretty good for week 0 standards. Northwestern, I can't remember who they played last year, but I always get way
Nebraska?
over. Was it Nebraska?
Wasn't Nebraska when they won, they came back, and then Nebraska ended up firing and then Scott Frost got fired.
No, that was 2 years ago, though.
Was that 2 years ago?
Because last year, Matt Rule was the coach.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We were there.
So I don't remember who they played.
We were in Lincoln when Matt Rule was the coach. So, wow.
That's on you, Tony.
Rusty.
Dude, are you awake today?
I am. I'm fully awake. I've already done another podcast. These years are really blending together. I mean, I didn't look at where the kickoff was, and I had forgotten. Yes, I know that the season has been opening the last few years in Dublin, and I went to Northwestern for grad school, so I pay a little attention to the Wildcats. I thought that was last year, because last year they really overachieved, right? I mean, they had the interim coach and people. I mean, they were punching up a lot, and I was kind of folding that into like a week 1 win that got the momentum going, but really that wasn't the case. They won week 1 2 years ago, and I don't know if they won again or something. Like, it was horrible.
Yeah, Notre Dame played last year, by the way.
I was just going to say Notre Dame played.
And Notre Dame generally that would make more sense because of the Fighting Irish in Ireland. Yes. But I still don't like college football starting in another country, 5,000 miles across the...
Remember Caleb Williams? Caleb Williams, USC played week 0 last year. San Jose State on the there was that game on Pac-12 Network. Vandy, Hawaii. Yeah, there were some decent games last year, but yeah, like you said, it started with that Notre Dame Navy game.
Well, it's not week 0. I mean,
Yeah.
I know they call it week 0, but
That's
everyone's
literally
playing.
what they call it.
So it's week. I know. I'm not correcting you. I'm correcting them. It's week 1. You started. Like, it's not week 0. How's there a week 0? If you're
Because
playing
not
college
everybody's
football,
playing.
but the season started. Not everyone plays every week. There's bye weeks. That doesn't make week 12 not week 12.
I actually don't even hate week 0. It actually makes more sense than calling that week 1 when not everyone would be playing week 1. That would be more counterintuitive in a lot of ways.
I think Texas is where week 0 started because they would have, again, some of these kickoff classics in high school. I covered, Texas high school football, and they did that. And then they would go into the full week 1 slate. So some of those premier schools would play week 0.
Where were you down in Aledo, Texas, Reiner? Is that where you were?
Yeah, and they generally would play in Texas, amazingly enough. It's crazy, I know. I mean, high school football in Texas, college football in America, in Ireland, It's
well, we will get to see some Texas football this year, and we'll touch on that deep into the show. But we got a 3-parter for you today. It is the 2024 Michigan football season preview. Part 1, we will start with the defense. Then after a break, we will take a look at the offense. We will sort of break down both sides of the balls, what to be excited for, points of causes for concern. And then our final segment, we will have to make our official predictions, plant the flag, and let you know exactly what will happen this Michigan football year. I don't want to dislocate my shoulder, patting myself on the back. But for anybody who read Freep.com last year, you did see that I predicted Michigan would win the national championship. So clearly, whatever we say is obviously going to happen yet again. That's how this goes, right, guys?
Tell me they were ranked number 2 heading into this.
I didn't see you pick them. I missed where you wrote it. I missed where anybody else picked them to go 15-0 and win the national championship. I also said it would be Jim Harbaugh's final season. I also said it would be the best season in tight end history for Michigan. And we're not going to talk about how I said Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards would each run for 1,500 yards and 15 touchdowns, or that Michigan would win the award again. But they were a finalist. So for both predictions, 3.5 out of 5, I would take it and run if I can be that accurate again this year. Because I was texting Andrew about it, and there's a lot of unknown.
No, I mean, last year, picking Harbaugh to go to the NFL would be the last year. Not a terribly bold prediction, I would say.
No, now, see, I'm pushing back on it. It doesn't feel bold now that it happened.
In the preseason, ranked number 2. There's only there's only one team that they would have had to technically beat, because by virtue of being ranked preseason number 2, they would automatically been in the national championship game, essentially.
Well, yes, but they still had to play Ohio State to get there. The year before, I mean, a lot of people, I will not accept this flack. I will not stand for it, because nobody else did it. Now that they've done it, now everyone, oh, well, of course they did. I didn't see anyone else.
I picked them to go undefeated in the regular season. We didn't get to the national championship part. I probably would not have picked them to win the national championship. I would probably pick Georgia, but that's just, that was my thought. And, I don't know.
So Michigan having not done it in 25 years, Georgia being the presumptive favorite, one could say it was bold to say Michigan will win. Man, we're taking a long time to get into this, but you can see we're fired up. All right. So we'll put a timestamp that if you want to skip ahead. All right. The defense, now orchestrated by Wink Martindale, should be similar, should be different. Tell us about this positionless defense, right?
Well, I mean, I think, that word is kind of a little bit exaggerated. I mean, you have positionless basketball, and that's a little bit more, feasible, where you can have a point forward, even a center shooting from 3-point land, basically being a stretch player in basketball. In football, I mean, you can play cross position as a defensive back, but you're not going to have, a cornerback, lining up at defensive tackle. Now, funnily enough, so Wink Martindale's kind of connected to the Ryan brothers, and Rob Ryan was crazy. Like when I was coming to Cowboys, he had Gene Ratliff, who's a defensive tackle, line up at safety. And it was just this ridiculous kind of scheme that he had. And he had one defensive lineman at one point that he ran in a formation against the Cleveland Browns. So, I mean, I think there is some element of Wink Martindale mixing and matching players, and maybe, presenting different looks. But when the final formation is set, before the game, I mean, most of the players will be operating in what their, general area of expertise is, which is, quarterback will be a quarterback and a safety will probably be in the, doing safety duties, if not maybe playing some nickel, and so there'll be some cross training. And then most programs do cross training, but I think the idea is just to have guys, present a different look and confuse the quarterback and then get set in their, given formation.
Right. And I mean, and the idea is there's been a lot of talk about wink and the blitzing, but some of the players and coaches are saying, I mean, it's not pressure or it's not blitzing, it's pseudo pressures, right? Or simulated pressures, sending four, but not just four linemen, right? There's someone coming off. There's the nickel is blitzing, and this edge is actually dropping into coverage.
Well, that's what Minter did. But I actually think, the fact is that we all know that Wake blitzed a lot.
Yes, he
at
did.
the NFL level, and that's blitzing with actually sending extra rushers. So that's extra pressure. So I do think that they're going to blitz a lot more. Whether they're going to be a sound defensively, I'm curious because it's sometimes you get burned in the NFL if you blitz a lot. Certainly that to be the case in college if a guy especially doesn't get to the right spot where he should be, which is much more likely in the college level than even the NFL.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I mean, there's so many pieces to go over with this defense. I guess we'll stay in the secondary and then we'll move our way forward since that's kind of where we're looking now. And as we talk about positionless might be a stretch, but the idea is versatility, right? Guys who can play different positions and are capable of doing different things, which is a little bit of a change from the Jim Harbaugh mold, which in the end was kind of finding the specialists, right? We want guys who are good at these things and we're gonna play to these strengths. Now, maybe it's a little different, which is why maybe you see someone like Wesley Walker from Tennessee coming in, someone who's played 2,000 plus snaps at the Power 4 level. He's played deep as safety. He's also played sort of in the box as a nickel close to the line. So just that sort of positional versatility. I mean, I when we spoke to him the other day, I was moved, or I was pleasantly surprised with his honesty, saying like, "Yo, like if Rod Moore wasn't here, I probably wouldn't be hadn't gotten hurt, I probably wouldn't be here." And so it's just within. But he was not the only one who was added that weekend, right? Ricky Johnson from UNLV, Jaden Mangum from Michigan State, and then Amir Hall from Albany. So I mean, Michigan made a concerted effort to shore up this secondary, and I believe with this many pieces, or I'd like to believe with this many pieces, that is how they are able to sort of, maybe it's not positionless defense, but it's putting guys in a few different spots and lining up in just enough different formations where, I mean, Steve Kasula, the tight end coach, was talking about it. He was saying it's not as much as who's lined up, but where they're lined up, and it's got to go both ways, because just because this guy is there does not mean he's necessarily nickel, right? Maybe if Will Johnson's on this half of the field, it's because he is covering the primary receiver with a safety over the top. Maybe there's more pressure coming from this. It's just all the things you have to consider.
Yeah, I mean, there's pluses and minuses to that. I mean, when I was covering the Cowboys, again, Rob Ryan ran 33 formations during one season of defensive. I didn't even know there could be that many formations. And it didn't work because, people were confused and they got, out of sorts. And this is at the NFL level. And then they took a totally different direction when they basically hired Monty Kiffin and Rod Marinelli, who played a very basic defense. I know Rod Marinelli probably gives, terror signals to Lions fans, just the mere mention of him. But the fact is that, Rod Marinelli was a pretty solid defensive coordinator, ran a very basic Tampa 2. He ran like 8 formations. I did a whole story about that. And the defense eventually evolved into a really good defense by 2 years later. And so sometimes you can have too much. And that's the question I have in Wink Martindale. I mean, are they going to try to throw too much at these guys right off the bat? And if that's the case, I mean, you could see some maybe breakdowns early on against Fresno State. The problem with Michigan's schedule this year it doesn't afford you many opportunities to have those kind of breakdowns and get away with them because, I mean, you're not facing Bowling Green and East Carolina and UNLV. You're facing some pretty good teams right off the bat, Fresno State and Texas, and then USC in week 4.
Yeah, no ramp up period. Certainly. And then just, I mean, since this is the preview, we'll very quickly. So a few notes. It sounds like this last week sounds like it might be Jair Hill over Amir Hall at that second cornerback spot. Maybe Zeke Berry over Jaden McBurrows at the nickel spot. So that could be, sounds like, I mean, they said there's still time, but Lamar Morgan, the defensive backs coach, did give us that bit of information that right now that's kind of where things are leaning. I think, Griner, somewhere that might be overlooked or under thought about in this secondary. I mean, we're always talking about Will Johnson, right? In the secondary, we're always talking about Mason Graham and KG up front. It's the linebackers. It's that linebacking unit that could really tell the story this year, not statistically, but eye test, right? In the sense that 2 years ago, if you recall, when it was Junior Colson and Mike Barrett, I mean, Junior Colson was really banged up at the end of that 2022 season. And Mike Barrett, it was really his first year as a full-time starter in that role. And they were moving guys in behind him, Jimmy Rolder a bit, Micah Pollard a bit, Jaden Hood a bit, but there was no one they could rely on as a third guy in the room. And that caught up to them. I mean, both Colson and Barrett spoke last year about just how helpful it was to have Ernest Hausman as sort of their understudy. Hausman's versatility, talk again about positional versatility, to be able to play Mike or Will, I mean, was a huge help last year. And now this year, it figures to be Hausman and Jayshawn Barham, the transfer from Maryland. But behind them, it's those same names I just mentioned, but there's not a ton of experience there. And I don't know that they have anyone in that third spot who they feel even 80% as good about as they felt about Ernest Hausman last year.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I mean, and I've heard that I guess that they're really high on Barham, inside the program, and think he's going to be a real breakout player for them. And they're kind of counting on him being the big pickup, I guess, from the offseason, as far as just really kind of taking maybe the defense, or bringing it back to the level it was last year in that sense. And I think they'll be solid again. That starting 11 is going to be really, really good. Question is, like, how long are they going to be able to, play, and, the snaps, are they, going to be able to maintain their stamina over the course of the season? And that's the question. I mean, and this goes back to the offense, again, being able to sustain drives and protect the defense themselves. And so they were able to do that last year. Michigan, again, they faced the fewest snaps in the Power 5, or faced the fewest plays, or defending the fewest plays in Power 5 last year. I don't know if that's going to be possible this year. And they don't have the depth that they had last year. So that's my biggest concern with the defense. I think over the course of the season, they're going to play a much tougher schedule. You're going to have to play a lot more snaps early on. Or are they going to be able to kind of hold up during that time? Because, I mean, again, a lot of wear and tear on the defensive side. Guys get banged up, and it starts to accumulate, towards week 8, week 9, week 10.
Yeah, it's not East Carolina, UNLV, and Bowling Green coming into town, right? Which is one of the two reasons. And when you think about the fact they lost 3 defensive linemen to the NFL last year as well. Sure. I mean, there are fewer pieces and there are more difficult teams, which, I mean, is all just sort of works together against them. I mean, we were just doing the research before the show. Kenneth Grant played 40 snaps in one game in his career, right? And I mean, I was talking to him earlier this summer, and we'll have a piece coming out on Freak.com on Sunday, a very in-depth piece. I think people will like it, about Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, sort of their journey to this point. It was very, very fun getting to talk with them and their parents about their childhood. But KG was at 350 about a month ago, and he said he plans to play this season at like 330. Mason Graham wants to play closer to 310, and they're doing it just so they're not as tired, so they have more stamina and can just last more plays. I mean, sort of simple as that. Behind them, there is depth, though, on this defensive line. Rayshon Benny sounds to be healed from his lower body, foot, ankle, what have you, injury that he sustained in the Rose Bowl last year. And then, Etta, who came as a really highly rated edge. Sounds like he's put on some weight. They've moved him inside as well. Do you what is your feeling about the defensive line? I think it could be.
I think it's excellent. That's obviously the strength of the team. And I think what Graham and Grant are going to do, are they're going to push the pocket and flush the quarterback into those edge rushers. So those guys are going to get the sacks and
Derek Moore, Josiah Stewart.
If Mason Graham and Kelly Grant don't get to them first, I mean, it's basically they're going to be able to
the quarterback.
They should be able to leverage also the ball towards the area, the strength of the defense based on those two guys. And that's why defensive tackles are so important now. I mean, because the game plan for most offenses these days, give the ball out quickly. Well, the hardest way, that's the reason why they want to get it out quickly, is because they want to get it out quickly for the edge rushers to collapse on them. But you know what? You can't get it out quickly if you already have a defensive tackle on you. And, the quickest path to the quarterback is up the gut. That's the thing. And so I remember doing a story about that with Quinnen Williams, the Alabama defensive tackle. Is a monster. He was now a monster for the New York Jets. And, again, he would say the coaches would emphasize the quickest path to the quarterback was, up the middle. And so, by the time Quinnen Williams became a star, defensive tackles were starting to become more and more valuable. I mean, Chris Jones at the, Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, before it was edge rushers. It was Aaron Donald, and then Aaron Donald and Chris Jones, and all those guys started, becoming the kind of top defensive linemen. And so that's the premium position. That's why it's also the most valued position, I think, in the transfer portal, is to get the defensive tackles. And so that's why Derek Harmon was such a big commodity in the transfer portal coming out of Michigan State, even though he didn't have the statistics that would suggest that he was a pretty valuable asset, as people, determined. And so I think Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant are, worth every penny that they were probably getting, from NIL money in this, given the market and what it is. And so I think that where their value is. They're going to push the guys into the edge rushers, and those guys are going to feast on quarterbacks as a result.
What's hard to find? People who are 350 pounds and can move well. That's why those guys are also valuable. And it all kind of started, like Reiner, you kind of talked about a little bit of the transition, but a lot of this is a development of, when Tom Brady started, hey, why am I holding the ball? I'm just going to get this thing out in space, pop, 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 quick passes. Right. Well, if you're doing quick passes, which everyone is doing now, taking advantage of the space, then the guys on the edge a lot of times don't even have time to get there. By the fastest guy on the league doesn't have time to get there, even if they blow right by him. And so that's why a lot of the pressure up the middle started becoming more important, and pressuring them to the outside and not letting them have a clean pocket. And that's kind of why that defensive tackle position got even more valuable.
And it's something Michigan's line worked on a lot last year, if you recall, Reiner, right? I mean, they were talking about, they used to do things in the two rooms, like edges and interior. I think they brought them together, if I'm remembering correctly, last room. They were doing full unit meetings because they wanted to improve just the edges and the tackles working together in tandem. Edges keeping contained and keeping that pocket, tackles just collapsing it, right? And just all funneling it together.
Yeah, I mean, and it makes sense. I mean, again, it works hand in hand. And so that's where that should be the strength of Michigan's defense. And that's why a lot of people are optimistic about it. The question, though, again, is can they sustain that over 4 quarters, 12 weeks this season? Because it's going to be a lot harder to do that based on the schedule that they face.
It's right. Not many starters were playing in the fourth quarter last year. Much more difficult schedule. An offense that might not put up as many points to supplement. There's plenty of talent, but also reason to think that, who knows, maybe this is not going to be the same recipe for this defense. All right, going to take a quick break. On the other side, the offense, what's it look like, and how do they replace 10 starters? Don't go anywhere. This is Hail Yes. All right, fellas. When you are replacing 10 starters and one of them is the quarterback, I think the first order of business is replacing the quarterback. That would be my first order of business. However, Michigan does not seem, I mean, not that they're not prioritizing that. It does not seem as if they've made a decision. Big Ten Network was in town yesterday and gleaned sort of what got to see what we had gleaned. And I talked about on another podcast that I was on earlier this week. This really seems to be down to a two-man race. Alex Orji, Davis Warren, and I think that Jack Tuttle would actually, this is me, I think Jack Tuttle would maybe be the number two should he be fully healthy in either situation. The reason I say that, Reiner, there's a lot more overlap with Jack Tuttle's game than the other two, right? I think Jack Tuttle is sort of a JJ light, very light, where Davis is more pocket passer. He can run too. There's some similarity there. But Orji, we know what Alex Orji is, or what he's been billed to be, which is the runner first, then the passer. Your thoughts about quarterback? Which direction should they go? And are you sort of picking up what I'm picking up, that this offense is going, like there's a base offense, but there will be packages based on whichever quarterback they go with, and time's kind of ticking.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think the favorite is Alex Orji. I think there's just probably reluctance to put Davis Warren in that position, and I have to feel like in some ways he's hurt by the fact that he is a former walk-on, and it just has it's just not as easy for somebody like that to break through based on that status, as ridiculous as that may be. But I think Davis Warren is the more proficient passer, the better downfield passer. I think he can operate the offense very well when he's in there. I don't know if he has as much of a high ceiling as Alex Orji. I think he has a higher floor, and that's the question. I mean, Orji, I think, is going to be able to do more things, be more dynamic, and expand the dimensions of the offense just because of his running ability. But maybe Davis Warren is a more efficient operator, and you might not be able to have both. I mean, you might have to choose one or the other, what you want, and Kirk Campbell's going to have to make the decision. But I think he's going to lean towards Alex Orji. I think he's going to go for the higher ceiling.
That's interesting, because what I was just about to say is, if you are right, and Davis Warren does have the higher floor, for this Michigan team, I think you need the higher floor quarterback, don't you? I mean, there's plenty of talent elsewhere. There's plenty on this team. I feel, I mean, how did Michigan just win this national championship? I mean, they've had great defenses for years. They've had an awesome running game for years. It was a quarterback who was not going to hurt them, right? Someone who yes, you can win with, who did have upside, but it's not going to shoot you in the foot. And I think that's what this Michigan team needs this year. We're talking about, they need someone who can move the sticks, someone who can value the ball, right? It's not going to turn it over. That's when I think of that. I think of high floor. I don't need someone who's going to make all the wow plays and end up on SportsCenter top 10. I need someone who's going to complete 12 of 17 passes for 182 yards, 1 touchdown, and no picks. That's what I need.
I don't disagree. I think that sometimes an offensive coordinator can be seduced into, especially a guy who's trying to prove himself after he got let go at his one and only shot to run an offense, which was Old Dominion, Kirk Campbell. I mean, I think he wants to probably have the guy who's going to be, quote, more explosive and kind of show off something. And then this was the problem with Josh Gaddis, I think. They basically had to take the keys away from him in 2021, which is how you got Keaton McNamara running a pretty boring but efficient offense. And that's the kind of thing that you would probably get with Davis Warren to some extent. The question is, like, does Kirk Campbell fall into that line of thinking and kind of park his ambitions a little bit with that and kind of have more of a boring offense and have that label? I mean, and so he's going to have to make that call. But I think the other thing that Alex Orji gives is that, again, I don't think this offensive line and running game is necessarily going to be, running at the same track that they did the last couple of years, because again, I think it's going to take a little bit, and I don't think they have the pieces that they did the last couple of years. I don't think Donovan Edwards is the same as Blake Corum, where you're getting those 4 yards a pop, consistently. And so who's going to help enhance the running game and open up some lanes? Alex Orji does that because he can stretch the perimeter. They have to account for that. So that opens the middle. If Davis Warren's the quarterback, they can probably just jam the middle and try to convince him to beat you. Alex Orji can keep them probably going from a running standpoint over the course. The other thing that Alex Orji provides, and I've written about this, he can help the pass protection just because of his elusiveness. And again, when you're breaking in 5 new offensive linemen, you're probably going to have some pass protection issues early on. So he can provide a safety net just based on his athletic ability. So I think there's some reasons for why you'd want Alex Orji to be the quarterback.
I was gonna ask Tony to tell us a little bit about Davis Warren, because I think he is kind of an unknown to some Michigan fans. If you didn't maybe watch the spring game, he's kind of been around for a while, right? You know who Jack Tuttle is. He's kind of the veteran guy. You know who Alex Orji is. He's on, Bruce Feldman's freak list. But can you tell us a little bit about Davis Warren and why he maybe has an appeal and why he's kind of just sticking around here?
I mean, the reason Davis Warren is sticking around is because he's a good guy. And he made connections within the program, within the community. He didn't call himself a good guy, but that's what he told me when I went to the hospital, when I went to Mott with the team after the national championship. And he was one of like 3 players there. This is not a known guy, right? That's part of his story. I mean, Davis Warren is a cancer survivor from high school. It kind of derailed his career. It's part of the reason he didn't have more high scholarship offers, and part of what has put him on this path. And frankly, the fact that Davis Warren is actually in this discussion, like legitimately in this discussion, is remarkable to me. I mean, you can go back and listen. I was wrong. I said off season, I said there were going to be 3 people in this race. It was going to be Alex Orji, it was going to be Jack Tuttle, and it was going to be whoever they got from the transfer portal, because that was my belief of the way that they needed to go with this. But Davis Warren, I think we kind of touched on it a little bit. I mean, his stats are not great in college, right? But you've seen some mobility. You've seen the deep ball in the spring game. You've seen mobility in backup time. And then I know, and the things I know about who he is and just the way he carries himself. I mean, Reiner, I was going to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but in this one instance, I know I'm not wrong, because I remember Kirk Campbell talking about how it's not of course, skill set is extremely important, but we need a leader, right? A guy, someone who's going to do things the right way and set the right example for the team. People turn to the quarterback just inherently. And Davis Warren, no matter, I think that him coming here as a walk-on and working his way into this scholarship position, I think has actually earned him more respect. And I don't think guys hold against him the way he came, but see him who he is now. And that's someone in the starting quarterback mix for the University of Michigan.
Yeah, I don't think it hurts him within the locker room at all. But I think, sometimes perception affects how coaches view players, based on where they come from. And it's hard for them to, pull the trigger on a guy who's a walk-on and then go to pass over a player that they've recruited and give a scholarship to initially, which again, goes to their evaluation too. Some of this is, again, a reflection on the coaches themselves. And so that's what I'm saying with Kirk Campbell. He's got something to prove himself. And so it'll be interesting to see if he's going to, park his ambitions, and his personal ambitions, because Josh Gaddis wasn't willing to do that. And in 2020, it cost him, because they were throwing the ball a lot more than they ran it. And the whole formula got out of whack, which is how you got to the whole 2021 reset, which is, again, how you ended up with Cade McNamara being the quarterback over the flashier Joe Milton, who had to transfer out basically to make room for Cade McNamara. Cade McNamara was, again, probably the Davis Warren again in that situation. Are they going to go down that road again with Warren versus Orji?
What I know of Kirk Campbell, I don't think he has an ego to the point at all where he's going to try to prove something, Like, I don't think he's out here just saying, look, like I told you, like we can do this my way. I mean, I know he's very confident in the decisions he's made, but he does not. I mean, I just don't see someone who was an analyst 2 years ago who was just a voice in the room just to I mean he values the path and getting to where he is. I think he is looking for the opinion. I mean, the buck will have to stop with him. He will have to call the plays, and he will have to probably, I think it is going to be him in conjunction with Sharon, of course, making the decision. But I just don't see him forcing, like really forcing something and being just completely hell-bent on it. Like he did say, and you asked a great follow-up question a few months back when we spoke with him, just about when do you make the switch, right? If it's not going right, when do you make the switch? And he said, look, he's like, we're going to trust ourselves and we're going to think that we made the right evaluation. Now, that kind of flies in the face of what I just said, that he's not going to be stubborn. But I think they're going what he meant is they don't want someone had the feel of someone breathing down their neck. The idea is we're going to pick someone and we're going to go with it. That doesn't mean that they can't or wouldn't change course.
I mean, let's be honest. If in game 2, this is a completely different Michigan football schedule. They have Texas at home, week 2. Would any of us be shocked if, say, Alex Orji wins the job? We're in the second. We're well into the second quarter, and Michigan hasn't done anything, and they tried Davis Warren. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked by that at all.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. I mean, I think that's the problem. I mean, they don't have time to, again, wait patiently and hope that the guy that they pick develops. I mean, that's the problem here. And then you've got a guy who is trying to prove himself because, he's coaching also with a guy who's also trying to prove himself with Sharon Moore, after, a lot of people have some doubts about whether he can continue the track that, Jim Harbaugh, laid out, I guess, with the program. And so I don't know if, either one's going to be, immune to that. I think that they're both going to be possibly susceptible to, the outside stuff and, the pressure to kind of try to get results instantaneously. And the patience is not going to necessarily be there. And so I don't know. I mean, to me, Orji's probably the safer bet in the sense that, again, I think that he could possibly keep the running game functional and also do enough with the passing game to maybe move them along. I think Davis Warren is a good option, but I don't know if he's the right guy right off the bat because I think there's too many other moving parts and too many unknowns within this offense right now to be able to make a firm bet that they're going to be able to run the Cade McNamara 2021 offense.
There are a ton of question marks, and one that I would say exists that hadn't recently, as you touched on, is the complementary aspect of this, the running game. Right now, with that said, I do want to point something out because I think this is with so much quote unquote working against Michigan. I think this is something that sort of maybe works in Michigan's favor. Michigan's obviously run the ball very well in recent memory, but I think people are kind of inflating in their minds the success with which Michigan ran last year. It was really not that great. They were 43rd in the country, averaging 169 yards per game. The year before, when they won their second Joe Moore Award in a row, they averaged 239 yards per game, right? It's like 60 more yards a game, like a very large difference. And the reason I bring that up is Michigan, it's not like, the running game last year was not the running game the year before. So it's not like they're living up to 2 years ago standard. I think there is a chance that this running game could be on par with last year in the sense that, the offensive line, the rushing part of the offensive line was not great. They were actually much better in pass protection last year than they were in the run game. And Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards were both coming off injuries, right? And we talked. I think by the end of the year, Blake kind of found his form, but he was not the same initially early on. And I just feel that there was so much, like it felt like they left a little to be desired in that area last year. Like the running game could have been better. Now, of course, they won the national championship, so all's well that ends well. But I think this run game could be an above average, not elite, but a very sound run game. And if but the problem with that would be the passing game probably will not be what it is last year. So I think the running game does need to be a little bit better, but this is not like, it's not like, oh, last year Michigan was the second best running team in the nation, and now they lost everybody. It's all going to fall apart. It wasn't that great last year. It was good. It wasn't great.
Especially early. I remember our early podcast episodes. We were talking all the time, like, what's wrong with Michigan's running game? What's wrong with Michigan's running game? Why can't Donovan Edwards run? They're not creating the same type of push, especially those first few non-conference games.
Well, yeah, then that was with the veteran offensive line. I mean, they don't even have that. So these were guys backing up those guys. So with the exception of Josh Breed, who wasn't here, but I mean, it's like, so it might take a little while for the running game to get going, which is why you would have an Alex Orji possibly to, keep things on schedule. Because again, what he does is he opens up the middle where they can't key on, the A and B gaps. I mean, they're going to have to be mindful of him running outside the tackles. So, and I think that's where, his influence and our power kind of comes from. So I think that's where I think Alex Orji probably will kind of help the run game. And I wouldn't be surprised that will go factor into the thinking of if he's chosen as QB1.
I think that will certainly factor in, no doubt. Before we move on from the run game, quickly, my last thought is just about, on the other side, is if Donovan Edwards is ready to be the focal point running back, right? I mean, he has been the complementary piece since he's been in Ann Arbor. And we did see when he was put in very, very briefly in that premier role at the end of the 2022 season for 3 games, he starred. He started against Ohio State, against Purdue, against TCU. However, everyone did. That had us questioning how good Blake Corum was, right? Because it's like, well, can anybody just run for 200 yards behind this line, right? And so, and then you have last year when you see Blake Corum was still more efficient. Donovan was a completely different back. And so what does he look like this year? Was it the offensive line that made him, or was it last year he just didn't have, he's been talking about the consistency. Does he really just need his opportunities to find his rhythm in the game? And whichever one of those ends up being the case is also going to be a huge factor this year.
Well, yeah, I agree. But he's also, again, a different type of back than Blake Corum. Corum is going to get you by, 4 or 5 yards a pop and be consistent. Donovan Edwards is usually a feast or famine back, and that's not conducive to having sustained drives, one possession to the next, which is what Michigan generally did. So that's a problem potentially, and that's why maybe Khalil Mullins, will be a little bit better in that sense, and may need to spell Donovan more. Question is, like, how much do you spell Donovan? Because it sounds like, based on what his, history shows, is that he needs some kind of certain amount of carries, 10 plus carries, I think, to probably, break off one of those big runs and get his rushing average up. And so before he finds his rhythm too. And so I think that's the question. How much do you run Donovan Edwards versus Khalil Mullins? And are you going to be patient enough with Donovan Edwards to go a few drives with nothing gained from the running game, just so you can get Donovan Edwards in a rhythm?
It's a fine line. And one I think as the year progresses, I got a feeling that the pendulum is going to tilt Mullins. It's just going to be the way they need to do it for every reason you said. Just for it's what we were saying about the quarterback. They need the consistency. They don't need the nothing bomb. They need 5, 6, 4, 7, 4, 5. That's what they need. And Khalil is a lot more that a la Blake Corum than Donovan Edwards. What about the pass catchers? Last piece of this offense. Did you know Cornelius Johnson is top 10 all time in Michigan football receiving? That blew my mind.
Not terribly surprising considering that
Reiner, damn you.
He's there for 5 years.
The first year he caught like 4 balls. It was really 4. It was really 4 years. But he barely had this dude. He never had more than 600 yards in a season. He had like 604. And yet he's one of 10 Michigan receivers all time to have 2,000 yards. There's no way that any of us would have. If I had asked all of us blind, where does Cornelius Johnson rank all time among Michigan wide receivers? I mean, what would you? I would have said like 30. He was a fine player, but largely forgettable, right? He never had a big season like Ronnie Bell or Roman Wilson or any of these guys. He was just kind of a dude. But that was just a guy, I should say, not a dude, just a guy. But that surprised me. And Roman is actually top 20 all time. The reason I bring this up, it's a lot of production to replace on the outside. Stop me if you've heard that before.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the receiving core, going away with Roman Wilson, I mean, and Cornelius Johnson to a lesser extent. I mean, it affects everything because, I mean, again, they're probably going to run, a lot of the passing game through the tight ends with Colston Loveland obviously being the top guy, but even Marlon Klein, I think you'll see a lot of, and they'll obviously want to get the ball out to Samaj Morgan. I mean, he's clearly kind of seen as the most explosive of those receivers, I think, more so than Tyler Morris and Frederick Moore. But they're solid receivers. Question is, like, do they have like an X receiver, a guy who's really going to, that tall, big body guy? They're hoping a Maureen Walker fills that role. And, the question is, though, can he do that? And are these guys going to be able to get off press coverage and do some of the things that you need as a receiver to kind of, create separation for a quarterback like Alex Orji, who may not be as accurate? I mean, Alex Orji had a below 50% completion or around 50% completion percentage in high school. So, and he's only attempted one pass in college ranks. So his passing is unproven, especially from an accuracy standpoint. So you definitely want some, guys that are going to create separation or provide a big target, which is why I think Colston Loveland's going to be the top guy. And I think they're going to do everything they can to get him the ball as much as possible. You
also need yak guys, right? Yards after the catch on bubbles and things of that nature. Just guys who are going to make plays with the ball in their hands.
Yeah, quick game. I mean, that's why Samaj, I think, is also the top guy from that standpoint.
Yep. For my money, we were doing breakouts earlier. I don't remember where we landed on it, if Samaj was too established already. But if he's not too established, Samaj Morgan is my breakout offensive player of the year this year. I mean, just there are guys who just attack the ball differently and just make plays with it in their hands. He's one of them. I've said it on here before. I'll say it again, and I'm going to keep up with this comp. He reminds me of Steve Smith Sr. Just fearsome, ferocious, thinks he's 6'5", really he's 5'9", but just plays like a bulldog. And Samaj Morgan will quickly this year become a fan favorite. Then I think Tyler Morris, that intermediate game, and you mentioned Marion Walker, maybe Fred Moore as guys who can take the top off, but whoever's playing X this year they'll have their work cut out for them, you could say. And then, wrote about Colston Loveland this week. Glad you mentioned him, obviously. I mean, it should be the first name out of everybody's mouth on this offense. I mean, he's going to be a first-round draft pick. He's a Mackey Award preseason guy for tight end of the year. I think, for my money, the best tight end in the nation now that Brock Bowers has left Georgia. He's got to be a difference maker. He's got to see 60, 70 targets at least. I mean, I'd say 75 targets. I mean, you can't throw the ball enough his way 6 times a game minimum. And so there are not all the pieces are proven, but these are names, these are guys. And put it this way, if you had JJ McCarthy getting the ball to these guys, I think Michigan would feel just fine about their weapon. Yeah, I mean, I guess so. I mean, I think so. I do question the size of their receiving core, and because obviously in sport it's trending towards longer corners. That's what everybody wants, and so there's a reason for that. And so, I mean, going against tall, Will Johnson is taller than almost all the receivers. Yeah, right. And so that's the question. And so I mean, and there was even, I guess, talk of Johnson even playing for some receiver this year, and which I think that was probably just kind of fun and games by him. But I mean, at the same token, again, they don't have the kind of profile of receiver that necessarily want. I mean, in that sense that the diversity, they've got a lot of small, quick receivers. And, the question is how much can they do the quick game versus being able to get the ball downfield? And are they going to be
do they even want to get the ball downfield? That's the question. It depends on if they have Alex Orji as the quarterback, because I don't know how much they're going to trust him to throw those deep shots. And so that is something that we're gonna have to watch for and see how the whole receiving game aligns with the quarterback, whoever that is behind center.
Naturally. And last thought on the offensive line, I just wanted to say this sentence once because I can remember I say it, and then hopefully everyone will forget I said it if this doesn't age well. This is my bold prediction for the offensive line. I think that their guards, Gio El-Hadi and Josh Preeb, could be every bit as good, if not even better, than Zach Zinter and Trevor Keegan were last year. Now, that's going to be hard because it all needs to come together. But, I mean, I put Preeb on that level already. I mean, I think he was that level of guard last year. There's just something about the way Gio carries himself, the way he talks, the way he walks. I mean, have you seen his pictures from Sterling Heights Stevenson? He looks older than I do right now when he was 15. I mean, this is just like, I cannot fathom being this size for that long. And I just got a sneaky suspicion. That's my bold, I said it, if it ages well, if I didn't, just disregard it. Thoughts. Do you have one of those, Reiner, or are we going to take a quick break and make our predictions?
I just think they're not going to be, they're going to have some issues, I think, pass protection wise early on. And I think that's always the case when you're replacing all five guys. And, I also have a question about the center position. I mean, I really do. I mean, they're having a battle there between Crippen and Raheem Anderson and they're having a battle at the quarterback position. And I just think the quarterback center thing has to be figured out. And they have to have that alignment also in identifying pass protection. Who's going to be doing that? Are they going to be on the same page? I mean, again, even the center quarterback exchange has to be pretty seamless. We've seen that that's not always could be guaranteed to be executed well, as i.e. Alabama in the Rose Bowl. So it is something to be concerned about. I think from a Michigan fan standpoint, is the offensive line replacing that many people and how it pertains to pass protection. It's certainly easier to run block than it is to pass protect. And so that's where a young offensive line or offensive line that hasn't fully gelled, those issues are going to arise potentially.
No shortage of question marks this year for the Michigan football team. That's to be sure. All right, one more quick break. And after that, the moment you're all waiting for, the predictions. Don't go anywhere. This is Hail Yes. All right, everybody, we are back. It's schedule time, and that sounds like a job for Andrew Burkle to tee us off.
All right, as everyone knows by now, Fresno State, Michigan opens up with them. I'm assuming you guys both have the Wolverines there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think even in spite of, Fresno State having a lot of players back from the team that was pretty darn solid last year, I think they could cause some problems for Michigan. I don't think it's going to be easy for them, especially in the first half. But I think, Michigan's talent eventually overwhelms them, especially on the defensive side. And I think they're able to kind of win going away.
Yeah, Mikey Keene threw for their quarterback, threw for nearly 3,000 yards last year. He's a really good player, talented team. I'll do my best. Lee Corso, closer than they think, but Michigan will hold on. But there's going to be, people are going to be looking around a little bit at halftime. Like, why is this only a 7-point game? It's going to be one of those.
Totally agree. Yeah, I think this one screams a game where it's like little nervy, edge of your seats. Everyone's like, look, you see the guy who sits next to you or by you, and you see him in the by the bathroom or getting a snack at halftime. You're like, dude, what's going on? What's going on? But then they end up pulling away in the second half. I think Michigan takes care of business there. All right, Reiner, Texas, debatably the season-defining game here, because if they can win this one, that sets them up real well. But how do you see this one going?
I'm thinking Texas. Texas went into Tuscaloosa last year, week 2 and 1. Sark is able to usually find some matchup issue in the defense, and he's an expert at that. And I predict he'll do the same. And then you have the fact that they really have a Heisman Trophy contender quarterback with Quinn Ewers, and they still have some good offensive pieces to go along with it. I mean, I think that they can come up here and we'll have no problem going into Michigan Stadium after what they did down in Tuscaloosa and Brian Denny last year.
They do have good offensive pieces, but not what they were expecting as of a few weeks ago. CJ Baxter, who was projected to be their top running back, he tore his PCL, LCL. And then Christian Clark, who, yes, is a true freshman, but I mean, they liked him, from my understanding, what I was reading, sort of like an RB3 guy. I think it was an Achilles, right? And so, I mean, they're down two of their top three running backs before the ball's kicked off. And so I'm going with Michigan. This game is at home. Michigan, not that there haven't been big games at home, but I mean, they've been waiting for the juice like this in a non-conference game since I don't know when, right? I mean, other than Notre Dame, I don't know the last big game that came like this to Michigan. Do you offhand, Reiner? Is there one that strikes you? I mean, I know we didn't really discuss this beforehand, but as you think.
Oregon? Maybe?
Yeah, Oregon, like 07. That was 07. And that was before Oregon was Oregon with Dennis Dixon. I mean, that was the emergence. That was their birth, so to speak. And so, but I mean, I know it's a new team, but they're 40-3. There's a lot of dudes who know how to win in this locker room. They're at home. And I know Sark is an offensive mastermind, but I mean, this defense is just something else. I don't know. On the road, I'd feel a little different. I don't know why. It's really hard for me to pick. Really, I guess what it is I'm looking at the whole schedule, and you think about the fact that they've lost 3 games in 3 years. It's just hard to pick against them a lot. They know how to win. There's a lot of winners in this locker room, and so I think it's going to be tight. Maybe a Dominic Zavada game-winning fourth quarter field goal, thinking like 21-18, something like that, 22-19. A weird score, a random score, a safety somewhere in there, but a very fun game that I will miss attending my sister's wedding.
I think I'm going to side with Reiner on this one. I do agree Michigan definitely can win this game, and I think it's going to be a very close, low-scoring affair. But I just think that Michigan, Texas has 2 quarterbacks who are more, settled in and known quantities than what Michigan has. I just think that going into that game with a lot of questions maybe about offensive identity, at least from what we know now, maybe they come out against Fresno and just blow them out of the water, and the offense looks great and they know exactly what they are. But from what we know now, I think that Texas is just a more known quantity. So I think, and they're just a beast in the trenches. So I'm going to go with the Longhorns in that one, but I could totally see it going either way. Let's buzz past Arkansas State, because I'm assuming that'll be a win for all three of us. Michigan, USC. Tony, we'll start with you on this one. USC, from what I've been reading, actually might be a little bit slept on compared to what the national expectations could be because of how gross that defense was last year. But you're going to take it from, it's the classic, absolutely terrible coach. New coach comes in and brings you a level of standard that you may not get if you didn't do that transition.
Yeah, true. But then on the other side, they lose the Heisman quarterback in Caleb Williams and enter Miller Moss, right? So yeah, highly regarded, but you never know. And much like it's very difficult for teams from the Midwest to travel west of the Mississippi and go anywhere on that West Coast, it's not like other teams do it much better, right? And like in the opposite direction, West Coast teams don't typically fare well when they go 1,000, 2,000 miles east. And so I'm going to go with Michigan again. It's just USC. Texas was much more debatable in my mind. It's not that USC can't win. It's not that I almost called him Lane Kiffin. It's not that Lincoln Riley doesn't have a very potent attack. And I mean, he's as good a mind as there is in the game. Just Michigan is farther along. Again, it's at home. They're deeper into their idea, like who they are of this era. And so I think Michigan and their defense. If Michigan didn't have this dominant defense, a lot of these would be like, yeah, I'd be leaning the other way on a lot of these. But as they said, defense wins championships. They had the top defense in the nation last year. It won a championship, and they look like they got the best one this year.
Yeah, I think, again, because of the defense with Michigan, I give them an advantage in this game, especially going against Miller Moss, who doesn't have a ton of experience at quarterback for USC. But I do think that the defense for USC is going to be much better with D'Anton Lynn running and calling shots. So I actually think it's going to be a pretty close and competitive game, and probably will play out differently than people think based on what happened with USC last year and their defensive struggle. So I give Michigan the advantage just because, again, they probably have some more known factors, and they were, obviously much more successful last year versus what USC was. And I think there's still some question marks with USC going forward, but I don't think it's going to be as much of a gap between the two programs as it would have been, I think, last year.
If the Texas game sets the ceiling for Michigan's season, I think this one sets the floor. If Michigan loses this game, I think they could easily go 7-5 because if you're losing to USC at home, you're probably not beating Oregon. You're probably not beating Ohio State. So I think in a lot of ways, this game sets the floor for Michigan. So I do think Michigan takes care of business in this one, but I think it will be closer than people think because USC can score. They can score. That's not very debatable. If you look at their yards per play, their scoring, their offense kind of fell apart at the wheels kind of fell off last year, but you got to kind of throw it up. They had a weird amount of pressure on them because of Caleb Williams and this Heisman candidate coming back and #1 overall pick. And it just felt like the vibe was off last year. I think the weight of Caleb being gone, not that I actually am a Caleb Williams believer, but not that I don't like Caleb Williams, but I think the weight of him being gone could kind of be a nice lift off the shoulders for some of those USC guys. But that's kind of my takeaway. All right, I'm going to go boast through 4 games here. Stop me if you have one of Michigan losing. Minnesota at home.
Stop.
At Washington. At Illinois. Michigan State at home. Any particular thoughts that stick out for you? Because it feels like 4 Michigan wins likely, but Reiner, looks like you got a thought.
Well, I think USC, like you said, is the floor. And if they do lose that game, I mean, I think Washington's definitely on the table for a loss. I mean, again, going out to the West Coast, and that's not an easy place to play. It's one of the toughest stadiums in that part of the country, that and Austin Stadium with Oregon. So those are the two that's allowed. And, the program, if they already have 2 losses at that point, it could just snowball from there. I mean, the kind of aura's gone by then. So, that game hinges, I think, on the USC result. And, as far as like Michigan State, I think it's going to be much more competitive than it was last year. I don't think it's going to be anywhere close to 49-0. And I think
not a high bar there.
Yeah, no, but I think MSU is going to actually, be able to do some things from an offensive standpoint. We'll see, but based on, because the offensive line remains a huge question. But if they can, get some things going by there and kind of solidify there, then I think that game's a little bit tougher than Michigan may expect going into this season.
Yeah, possibly, but I'm not gonna waste more. I'm gonna waste more in the sentence on a team that lost 49-0 last year.
Right. I don't think.
But I don't know that I'm ready to go there with Washington either. I mean, if we think Michigan replaced a lot, I mean, Kalen DeBoer leaving Washington, Jed Fish coming in from Arizona. I mean, 2/3 of their team is flipped over. I think they're fighting for a bowl game. I think Washington's looking at a 5-7, 6-6 season. But no, Andrew. I mean, it's kind of remarkable, but I think Michigan, I guess, based on this, goes into November undefeated.
All right. Well, that brings us to the toughest yet, debatably the toughest test yet. I mean, Texas is obviously tough, but Michigan hosting the Oregon Ducks. Tony, thoughts?
Finally, I cannot feel like some Michigan beat writer homer like, yeah, Michigan. Oregon. I certainly believe Oregon will win this game. Oregon is Ohio State West. They are super talented. They have, both sides of the ball, quarterback, running back, Tez Johnson at receiver. People really, I'm not going to pretend like I know the names of the Oregon linemen, but like Jackson Powers Johnson, right? Like those type. Oregon is now, it's not the 07 Oregon we were talking about where it's just speed, something go to make Josh Gaddis proud and a spread offense and speed and space. Now this is a power attack. These guys will run downhill, they will throw downfield, and they will bruise you. And their defense is not what Pac-12 defenses used to be. They have the size and the speed as well. I think they might have been the second best team in America, third best team in America last year. Washington just had their number. It was a bad matchup for them last year, and they lost twice, and they got. But I think Oregon is here to announce themselves in the Big Ten, and they will do so with a win in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, I agree, and it doesn't help that they have Dylan Gabriel, who's seems like he's been
favorite
forever, and is probably a Heisman contender for sure. And then the fact that I think it's one of a few really complete teams in college football. I mean, you got a really, really good defense. You got a really good offense. You got, again, a coach who came directly from Georgia's program, who's been able to kind of copy a little bit of that model and bring it out west with maybe a little bit more sizzle. He's benefited from the Nike NIL money that he's got available to him, and I think he's got Dan Lanning is probably the most has the highest upside as a coach. I think long term, basically Kirby Smart is already established, but I mean this guy's the next guy up, and I think it's going to be seen probably over the course of the season that Oregon's a really, really solid team, and I think they have an outside shot of winning not an outside shot. I think they have a really good shot of winning the Big Ten over Ohio State.
I mean, it's going to be interesting. I mean, we the only thing that would maybe scare you off slightly is we used to once upon a time think Nebraska was going to hop into the Big Ten and just kind of run through it. Oregon is in a much better place than Nebraska was when they came in. But yeah, I mean, that would be the only question mark about Oregon, right? They have the roster, they have the coach, they have a play style that just kicks you in the mouth. And quite frankly, I think Oregon is closer to Michigan last year than Michigan this year. So I think you got to take the Ducks until something else proves otherwise as far as this game, because there's just so much known from the quarterback to the line to the defensive line to Oregon's always going to have their playmakers. So I think Oregon's just a little bit more of a known. So as we sit here in August, I think it's easy to sit here and pick Oregon, until otherwise.
And they have an SEC. I mean, the mindset. I mean, the sense the coach is, it's from the SEC, elite program. The recruiter, their head personnel guy, the GM, guys picking the players and, actively assembling the roster comes from Georgia. Went to undergrad at Alabama. It was like on the ground floor when they started the personnel department in Alabama. That's been the inspiration for all these personnel departments across the country. So they get the profile player that fits SEC level, which is, again, whatever you want to say about the Big Ten, that is the top conference in college football. It's established that that's where, kind of everybody's kind of trying to measure up to across the board. So I think, again, that mindset is carried over into so I don't think we're going to have
this might be the last year of that. The Big Ten might have something to say about that. I really believe.
Well, I think Ohio State, sure. I think Ohio State, again, has a.
I mean, the Big Ten's top four can go toe to toe with the SEC.
I think so too. I think what though, because Oregon has that mindset of again, those SEC programs. Ohio State has the same mindset. I think Michigan is starting to gravitate towards having that kind of mindset too. It's maybe a little bit more reluctance on their end, but there is that kind of, we're getting these big body guys and we're recruiting those guys and we're recruiting NFL type players, because Michigan for the longest time under Don Brown wasn't recruiting those guys on the defensive side. I mean, ever since they switched over to this Raven style defense, they have been getting guys that, again, Kenneth Grant would, Alabama would love to have a Kenneth Grant. It would love to have a guy like Mason Graham, and, again, Michigan 4 years ago was starting Carlo Kemp, a 280-pound guy at defensive tackle. So it's a different mindset now in a lot of the top level Big Ten programs.
All right. We got two more games here that I think we can kind of buzz through: Michigan, Indiana, and Michigan, Northwestern. No problems there, right? Michigan wins those. And then unless the only way they lose those is like Reiner said, if they drop the USC game and the wheels come off. I mean, that's the only way those games come. Even then, that would be, so we'll just buzz past those. And then the game, Michigan at Ohio State. Let's keep it quick because I think we've already set the record for the longest podcast ever. That's partially my fault. Tony, Ohio State or Michigan?
I'm going to Ohio State. Games in Columbus. Haven't beaten Michigan in 5 years. I mean, we had this discussion last week where we talked about what Reiner and I thought this game means in the grand scheme of Ryan Day and that program. I mean, you said keep it short. We can get into Michigan, Ohio State all day, but at the end of the day, I'm leading Ohio State. Games in Columbus, gotta have it. Been years. They feel due.
Yeah, I agree. I think Ohio State has the roster national championship level roster. They brought in a ton of major acquisitions in the offseason, the transfers that they picked up. And so I think, again, they're more of a complete team than Michigan at right now on paper. And I think that they're going to also have the hunger to win this game. And I mean, Ryan Day's talked about leaving no doubt, and I think that that's the mindset. So they're gonna be raring to go on that final day of November.
If not now, then I don't know when, because it seems like it'd be Ohio State's turn to very much get the series back in their favor. So again, this is not to say that Michigan's going to have a bad season. I think Ohio State does win. So Michigan finishes by my predictions 9-3, 10-2 for Tony, 9-3 for Reiner as well.
So then honestly, the question for you
honestly, would either one of those, I could see a world where if they knock off USC and USC creeps their way up the rankings, that would have to be probably their best win. 9-3 with losses to Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State. They're sitting right on the edge. 10-2, I think they're in.
Oh, okay. 10-2, it's a cakewalk. If it's 9-3 and it's those 3 losses, I mean, I don't know that you can get reward. I mean, what would the best win be? USC or Washington? And those might be 7-win type teams. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I mean, of course, you'd have to see the rest of how everything else shakes out around the country. But if you just do math, I mean, Penn State doesn't have a difficult schedule like that, right? I mean, people are talking about Rutgers as the sleeper because of their schedule, right? And so, I mean, I'm not going that far. But, I mean, Missouri, Ole Miss, Alabama, Georgia, Oregon, a random Big 12 school, Clemson, Florida State. Like, you just start doing the math, Texas, you kind of run out if you're 9-3. So I think, I don't know. I was going to ask you guys that's why I put them at 10-2. I'm like 10-2 and they're in. I didn't want to thread the needle at 9-3. I didn't know. And I just don't see them losing all 3 of the big games. I feel like they grab one.
Yeah, I mean, I think the argument against them in the playoffs, if they lose those 3 games as well, those teams are probably playoff teams. So what would make them be deserving to be in the playoff if they already lost essentially playoff games?
Or 0-3 against the teams.
Yeah. And so the counter argument is that, well, they played a really tough schedule and these other programs didn't. And, should they be penalized for having this tough schedule? And I don't know. I mean, it's like, the question is going to be probably on the committee, how are they playing at the end of the season? I mean, are they looking much better at the end of the season versus at the beginning? And even if they lost the 3 games, I mean, like, if it's a close game against Ohio State and they lose by a point, I think, you got to make an argument for Michigan being in the playoff, assuming that Ohio State's really, really good that year and undefeated themselves.
I think that's a fantastic point from Ryder, because for the entire college football for our lives, I mean, from the BCS era on, it was resume. If yet for a while, you had to be 12-0 or 11-1. Well, then, it could be 11-1 and pretty easily be in, but it had to be resume. Now, I think there's going to be a lot more discretion. 9-3, but you played really well down the stretch and you lost 2 games by 1 point. I think there's going to be room for that kind of discussion these days. And maybe if Michigan, barely loses to Texas, barely loses to Oregon, and loses on the last play to Ohio State, but smashed USC and everybody else in their schedule, maybe that's enough to get them in. I think that's, as Reiner said, that's going to be a much bigger discussion now than it ever has been before.
I mean, last year they told us that it's not about resume, right? Florida State was undefeated, and then they picked Ohio State Alabama over them instead because of how they felt going forward. So it is the combination. That is a great point. All right, everybody, that will certainly do it. Hopefully you feel good and prepared. And if you don't, anything you might have missed is going to be somewhere on freep.com in the sports section underneath Wolverines, but just go around freep.com, peruse, have fun. It's there's a lot of great content. Best newspaper in the state, arguably in the country. All right. So thanks everybody for listening once again. For our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery-Nichols, our audio engineer, Robin Chan, Andrew, Reiner, I'm Tony. This is Hail Yes. Next week is game week.